Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and you catch me once again on my travels this week. I've now circulated across the continent to Hungary this week. But yeah, what is this weekend actually? I'm not going, but there you are. I'm now in Hungary for those of you interested. Didn't mean I didn't catch the IndyCar though, because we've got two races to discuss on this occasion, being the Iowa doubleheader weekend, a weekend that we were all quite looking forward to, and I probably all left a bit disappointed, to be honest. If you didn't catch discussions we were having last week, the circuit obviously got a repave, and they tried a high line session, but a combination of the track becoming way too fast, the high line not working, the cars being too heavy, basically factored into a single file event. We didn't really see any overtaking outside of restarts and starts, and yeah, it sort of just all ended in a bit of a disappointing weekend where pretty much 95% of the race was decided on pit road, which was a bit of a shame considering the reputation Iowa had built itself up.
Yeah, and I guess both races kind of followed that similar pattern. There were a few more cautions in the first one, allowing a little bit more action there. But yeah, I don't like being negative. You know, I think all of us agree we love being advocates for IndyCar, the series, and speak so often about how good the racing is. But I think O'Ward put it well in saying essentially it's been ruined as a race, which is so disappointing, because I've spoken a lot about how much I love Iowa and the doubleheader and kind of the frenzy of overtaking, the chaos of lap traffic, and that kind of just all diminished, really. I think because we know how good the product can be is kind of what makes it all the more disappointing. I mean, in each race, we had less passes than the 250 laps run, when usually we're having comprehensively sort of over 1,000 overtakes. Last year, the first race, I think, had about 1,500 overtakes. This year, it didn't even reach 200. And that isn't obviously off a position, but just in terms of any on-track pass, because any pass is tough at Iowa. That was part of the challenge of, you know, the traffic, and that was why Newgarden was always so good, because he was so good at negotiating the traffic. But it was just an impossibility to make any pass on anyone, really, even traffic, you know, to the extent that you had leaders essentially just backing off because they didn't want to catch the traffic, and they knew that if they backed off, they wouldn't be overtaken by the guy behind them anyway, because it was too much of a risk to make a pass. And unfortunately, you know, there were bits of drama. We had accidents, and pit lane was entertaining, but none of that was due to stuff that happened overtaking wise, which is a shame, because that obviously was why Iowa was so good. And we kind of saw the hints of old Iowa on the restarts, but it was even 5 laps after a restart that upper lane just kind of closed down. And credit to IndyCar, they ran a highline session before practice started, but you know, as soon as we got into the 90 minutes of sort of all skate practice, drivers weren't using that high line, and then it just never kind of came in again. And it was too much of a risk to go offline. Ultimately, you know, you were going to crash. Even in practice, we saw leg spin, we saw McLaughlin spin for going offline. And unfortunately, this side of it isn't IndyCar's fault. NASCAR, as we've said, own the track, and it's a shame that it's come to this, because almost IndyCar and Hy-Vee almost saved Iowa as a track. So it's a shame that now the IndyCar race has been made into this bore fest. I mean, Alex Palou, we know how positive and effervescent he usually is, but he essentially said it was the most boring thing he's ever done. And IndyCar was such a bad fit for the repave that it's essentially like putting MotoGP on a dirt track, which is quite a stark comment to make. So yeah, it's just bitterly disappointing, and I think something needs to change. The package, as you said, Dan, wasn't there. I'll get onto a little bit more of that. But I think, yeah, the repave was pretty ruinous, and unfortunately, that's not the fault of IndyCar. And the races were decided by either fortuitous cautions or, in all cases, really pit cycles.
Yeah, it like you said, we don't really want to be negative, but whilst watching the race, it was a bit hard to kind of just like watch in a way. It was like I was nearly falling asleep. I think it didn't help that it was so late. But like I said, the only little bits of entertainment was the kind of the cautions and the restarts, and they shouldn't be kind of the main focal point. But yeah, it was just hard to overtake. Pat O'Ward afterwards said that it was only a single file track, if I remember that correctly, and it shouldn't just be like that. There should be overtakes after overtakes, and it should be stuff that makes it exciting, not just the pits and cautions, because we shouldn't be hoping for cautions, because that's not how it should be. You know, cautions mean that it could end up being really bad. Sorry, I can't speak. But we should just be trying to be there for the racing and purely just racing. And it wasn't at all.
I'll ask some questions. Who, I know NASCAR organised the replay, but do they consult IndyCar at all for these? Is it just, oh yeah, sorry, we're doing it, or do they give them prior warning? I don't know how it works, because
they'll do it. It's in their interest. They obviously, I think it was the first Cup Series race that's ran there, so their cars are obviously very different. I think Newgarden was one to speak about this, that their cars are very different, and the bumps that IndyCar could kind of weather, NASCAR probably couldn't really cope with them in the same way, which is why they had to kind of smooth them down the corners where there were those bumps. So I don't think they would, to be honest. No, I think it's just they'll do it if they own it. It's their kind of in their interest.
Yeah,
I have no idea how any of that works. Maybe they just send out an email so that they're doing it, and IndyCar just has to deal with it.
It's pretty. There was obviously the whole Texas PJ1 nonsense, and Texas became really good after they removed the PJ1. But yeah, it's just a shame to see NASCAR being prioritised in a track which is that's particularly significant on IndyCar's calendar. It is one of the most significant weekends outside the Indianapolis 500, the season finale, for example, just because it is a double-header weekend, and it was, race one is done, we got the same tomorrow, and part of the issue was, if you're leading, there was no point at overtaking a lap car, because you'd have to go on the high line, you'd go off, and therefore, when you are overtaking traffic, that's sort of made Iowa, you know, you got to get in the right lane, you have to make the right decisions, but that factor wasn't there either, so I mean, it was just a bit of a shame, because we said it's been such a good servant to IndyCar in the last few years, and now everyone's just feeling a bit disappointed. I think it also made it worse the fact that we did actually have two races on this free paved Iowa, so bit of a shame. I mean, hopefully improve it next year, but it's not going to be. The only way it's going to improve is somebody works the high line. Who's going to work the high line? Because it's not really to anybody's benefit to work the high line.
Yeah. Alex Palou actually came out and said that he's never supported double headers, and I think it was especially bad because we had a few crash cars after the first race, and the turnaround between kind of the finish of the first race and the start of the second race was about 14 hours. It was excruciating heat even overnight, and I think the crews, even Palou, as we'll get onto a bit more, crashed out of the first race and didn't really have that much damage. His crew was still at the track until 3 a.m. in the morning, and they had to be back there at 6. So you're on an hour of sleep, most of these teams. So that's another issue. But I think kind of tenuously linking to just the issues with the track and the one lane is kind of, I guess, the biggest moment of the weekend was at the very end of the second race with the big crash that we saw as Stingray Robb vaulted over Alexander Rossi, who'd slowed, running out of fuel. Then you had Kyle Kirkwood and Ed Carpenter kind of just basically losing their own cars in avoidance. Carpenter ended up on top of Kirkwood, and kind of tenuously that is because of drivers being so fearful of going offline. I think the main kind of bulk of why that happened was ultimately, I think Rossi had been losing fuel for a few laps, whatever, some sort of fueling issue. But Robb was clearly caught unawares as soon as Rossi kind of slowed suddenly. But I think part of that was that, Rossi didn't want to go offline running out of fuel, because even at those slow speeds, drivers were apparently almost losing it under yellow flags as well. And then Robb also kind of reluctant to go offline to pass Rossi until the very last moment, which is kind of why I guess the closing speed was as big as it was. That was a dramatic moment at the end of the race, wasn't it? Because we kind of had Power crossing the line in Lee Diffie final IndyCar weekend. It was quite the sign-off for him, because Power crosses the line and all of a sudden the camera's quite dramatically cut to Stingray Robb on the backstretch, kind of upside down, and then you see the camera pan down low and you've got 3 more cars, and what has happened here? But it was a major crash, and we've just got to say kudos to the safety to the aero screen, which saved a few drivers, because what if Robb's wheel was to hit Rossi, or Carpenter's wheel ended up on top of Kirkwood's aero screen? What if the aero screen wasn't there? So we must say, all the drivers were okay. Rob was taken to hospital for further evaluation by helicopter, but that was only because of the distance to the hospital. He was fine. He was cleared, released. But, drivers were, I think, Sunday's race, we saw a lot fewer risks, because I think Saturday we saw a few cautions. Not all of them were obviously because of drivers going offline or what have you, but I think drivers had kind of learnt they had to be pretty cautious by Sunday's race, which meant Sunday's race was even kind of more boring than Saturday's race, because even less risks were being taken. But I think that kind of slightly fed into this. There was a bit of a blame game going on. Should Rob have pulled out earlier? Should he have realised? Should Rossi have pulled off? But ultimately, it was just a kind of circumstances coming together. I think Kirkwood took back some stuff that he said and said ultimately it's just such a sudden thing and you can't really avoid that. But that was a crazy accident, one of the biggest we've seen in a long time.
Should we get on to some of the actual results in some ways? It's like the thermal spent like half an hour trying to get to the race winners. This is only about 11 minutes, so this isn't as bad this week. It was Penske winning both races. It's certainly not the two Penskes we expected to win the races coming into this weekend, but a first over win for Scott McLaughlin. We're touching him first. I mean, it's quite hard to assess people's individual races just because they're all very similar lines. Jumps started well, jumps on the McLaughlin started race 2 started P2 for race 1, and then was pretty much in contention. Was it the first set of stops he ever took hurted by just a whisker? And from then on, no matter how bad your tyres were, how bad your fuel was, basically, if you just drove in a lower lane, it would pretty much nigh on impossible to overtake you. So from that point, it was a fairly comfortable victory. He had quite a duel of her to won the restarts, on the early restarts to win the race. That was probably the best bit of racing we saw all weekend. But yeah, it was pretty plain sailing after that. Taking a first over win, obviously got very close in Texas a few years ago, but finally had that ticked off his list. He said he can now call himself an IndyCar driver with an able victory.
Yeah, we had a lot of chatter into the weekend, sort of, is there going to be a competitive reset with the repave? And like Penske had won the 5 of the last 7 races coming into this at Iowa. And on paper, them now extending that to 7 and 9, you're like, oh, maybe there's not been. But the fact that Newgarden kind of struggled so much, I think, shows, things have changed a little bit. And McLaughlin absolutely smashed qualifying. He got into the 187 mile per hour range in his first lap and then smashed the track record with a 188 mile per hour lap in his second. And yeah, for the first race, starting second, it was just a case of kind of biding your time when you sat there in second, really. That was kind of what we saw when it's so hard to pass, regardless of where you are or what cars you're chasing down. But he's becoming a bit of a phenomenon on ovals, McLaughlin. I've been really impressed. He's come close so many times. So this just felt like a matter of time, really. And yeah, ultimately it was won in the pit stops, but he controlled that race. He had to marshal goodness knows how many caution restarts. We had, I think, 6 cautions. He was probably at the front for 4 or 5 of those. So yeah, it was a good drive. And then Power's second race performance was, I guess, a bit more fortuitous. It was a weird one because it was fortuitous. He gambled basically on just staying out long beyond the first pit cycle because he said that he knew if there was going to be a caution, which is what he needed to be brought back into the race, that it would come on the outlaps. And he'd started that second race 22nd with Power, or somewhere sort of deep in the pack at least, because he hit the wall on his second qualifying lap.
It was 22nd, by the way. Sorry.
Thanks. I was just trying to check that while speaking. Yeah, so he was starting from quite deep, and he knew it would take kind of a gamble to get back to the front. So there was luck involved. The caution that he was hoping for came out. He called it a Scott Dixon yellow. Kind of, yeah, just made his own luck there, Power. I think he said that he'd heard your joke with him that Power through his career had loads of these where that he'd kind of been on the wrong side of it. So I think Power kind of felt, it was about time that he had the fortune of this. And then ultimately it was an overcut again that won him the race. It was his first over win since 2019 at Pocono. He'd never won at Iowa either. So yeah, after a winless last year, this is kind of just a continuation of this real uphill swing for Power. And it was a good rebound in Sunday's race as well, because he'd had a pretty wretched first race. The biggest thing was he basically punted Pietro Fittipaldi on a late restart, which he was very frustrated with himself for. It was basically he timed his kind of launch from a restart perfectly, but obviously not everyone was going to time it that perfectly. So ran into the back of Fittipaldi. I think he might have been laps down then already because he'd had a pit speed violation. So it looked like it was going to be a bit of a disaster weekend for back to the championship, but he's back up to second, right in the fight again, and kind of we're back to where we were mid-season discussing power chasing Palou, with lots of kind of stronger tracks for Penske coming up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with power, it's one which you can't take a victory away from somebody, but once you get that forward, like even at Iowa, I felt even more fortuitous to get these cautions because at that point you couldn't overtake. It was you'd pretty much be in a driving seat, obviously jumped below in the pits on the second occasion, and where it was just so hard to overtake. It was like, I think Ward said him and Palou should go to Vegas with the luck they got for that caution. So it happens. I think it's just a shame that we didn't get to see it. I mean, a combination of all the factors, isn't it? But a lucky caution was even more lucky in this occasion where you couldn't overtake, and from that point onwards, it was the race victory. I think it's probably worth touching on Joseph Newgarden because we know years and years past, he's the king of corn country. He's Mr. Iowa, 6 wins. I think in my previous, I haven't finished outside top 5 here since 2014. Something absolutely ridiculous. Just wasn't to be. He just did not have the pace of his teammates. Had a particularly messy qualifying session. I think he was 22nd race 1 and might have been 14th or something race 2. It was not a good qualifying. And then, I mean, race 1 was one of those where if you just stayed out of trouble, you'd actually kind of end up in a good result, even if you couldn't overtake, which is why Newgarden ended up third, because he didn't really have any issues whilst the others around him did. So you can don't get me wrong, he made 8 positions on the first lap, so I'm not taking that away from him, obviously, but that was sort of how you ended up there. Race 2, again, where there was a lack of cautions for this one, you were just stuck. So P7, but I think probably more significantly, that is realistically championship definitely over now.
Yeah, I mean, it is championship over really for him, you would say, because this was the weekend where, you really earmarked as he had to make the gains, and now all of a sudden we've gone from 8 races to 6 races left, taking a quarter of what we had going into Iowa off. And I think he said that, putting him on the back foot in qualifying was just like the continued pain of the season so far, because it put him before his 2 teammates in the qualifying order. So he couldn't learn anything off them. He kind of had to go in and just, see what was what and kind of gamble on the balance. And ultimately he said there was pretty massive imbalance in his car there. So, he's not always qualified on pole necessarily at Iowa. And, we must say as well, Power came into it with 4 pole positions in a row at Iowa. He didn't qualify. Well, he qualified 4th and then obviously 22nd. But Newgarden's qualifying was, big issue. There were lifts, all sorts. It was very messy, and then kind of made all the more alarming when McLaughlin and a couple of runs later and absolutely blew everyone away. He did what he could in the races. It was to get from 22nd to 3rd, even if you're not making tons of on-track passes in the stints, because that's how hard it got. He really made hay and showed his mastery at that track on the restarts. But ultimately, the fact that he wasn't his dominant self, a little imbalance in qualifying would used to have made a difference. And it kind of just hammers home, doesn't it, how much Iowa has changed and how it's almost like a different track with the repave. It's unrecognizable. But there were 2 really good drives from Newgarden, but it's not to be, and his season snowballed.
The issue is, if you had a quick car, I would noted this after coming second. It doesn't matter how quick your car was necessarily, because you couldn't overtake. But we know Newgarden probably had the fastest race car of absolutely anybody. But where you can't overtake, it means absolutely nothing. You're just stuck. So he could have been the fastest. I expect without the repave, he might have been winning, but it's just the story, isn't it, of the weekend?
Yeah. And one thing just to note as well, the dynamic of the race really changed. Like last year, it was a 4-stop race and it was extremely tyre limited. We've spoken a lot about the degradation, and I'll get into this a bit later on when we discuss Ed Carpenter, because he made some comments, but the tyres are very durable because of the hybrid system, and they're being very conservative because of that added weight. But that basically meant, even though they brought a softer compound than they had at the recent test, it still was just not enough for any sort of fall off. So it went from a 4-stop tyre limited race to a 2-stop race, where essentially, as Power did to win the second race, it was controlled by fuel saving, and that again just shows the dynamic of the races that's completely different to the race that Newgarden was so dominant at. So that's just something interesting, I think, to note on how it just completely transformed how the races played out.
Alex Palou, what a bit of a crazy weekend. It was a very rare mistake in race 1. I mean, initially, another issue of Palou leaving his pit box, second race in a row, that relegated him down, and then a rather bizarre crash, all by himself, very late in the corner, and the first time in a very long time, an accident by himself, which really takes him out of contention. And obviously had a better Sunday, finished P2, probably should have, well, not should have won, but it was certainly in the mix to win. And then, it's blowing the title fight wide open because all the other rivals have gained points on Palou this weekend. I mean, one benefit he'll probably take away is he was very quick on a short over, but I don't know how much overability you can actually equate to this race, because it wasn't really over racing. It was quite literally the typical driving in circles because you couldn't overtake. So I don't know how much a portion you can sort of give to that statistic across the weekend.
Yeah, I think this was as good as we've seen Palou on a short over. I mean, I guess qualifying kind of showed that. He qualified third, qualified second for the 2 races. So that was good speed. But it's weird because, I mean, that's not something we ever see from Palou, that sort of error. I think he just said his tyres were struggling a little bit, which was interesting because of what we've said about tyres not really struggling that much. Bit of a bizarre accident. He'd already actually in that race had another kind of clutch issue in the pit stop where I think, in fact, did he stop in the pits this time? Didn't he? It wasn't just a little bobble like at Mid-Ohio. So we're seeing a few of those issues. I'm interested to see whether that is something to do with it's kind of come in since the hybrid that we've seen a few more cars stalling. So there must be something drivers aren't getting used to. It was 769 days since his last DNF before that, which kind of just puts into perspective how essentially bulletproof he'd been. But it's weird because we kind of exit this weekend now with the buffer to second being relatively similar, closed down a little bit. But it's just brought so many more drivers kind of back into the fight, you sense. It's a lot more wide open kind of behind Palou. And I guess that it was weird that first race, and I guess it helped both Power and Palou, but also made them rue kind of their own misfortunes or errors, let's say, that they both had a very poor first race. So if Power had a good first race while Palou had his issues, he could have come out leading the championship even, and vice versa. Palou could have had a much more comfortable buffer again if he'd not crashed out or had the issue in the pits. So I think ultimately it was a good rebound on Sunday. I think that was a really, really strong performance, because that's the sort of day we said Palou needs to have if he wants to win this title. And, ultimately, if it wasn't for Power kind of gambling on that caution and Canapino losing it out of the pits and that kind of happening, we'd probably be talking about Power finishing lower end of top 10, and Palou's got his first oval win and, again, is stringing away in the championship. So, I was impressed with him, especially the rebound from the accident.
Sorry, I was going to say, we kind of knew that Palou wasn't kind of strong on ovals, and after the first race it made the championship really, really tight. I can't remember what it was, but it made it tight. And then now it's up 35 points to the lead, which is not a lot in terms of what he used to have. And now he normally has like consistency, and even when he doesn't have kind of a good result or the result that we think he should get, he's always kind of there getting the results. And kind of the first race, it wasn't like him at all, and it was just rare to see him make that kind of mistake. Stroll in the pits, it's fine, he could have managed that, but just the DNF, it was just kind of a move that never comes from him. And I think he knew that as well, kind of coming out afterwards in the interviews. I think he just knew that he doesn't really do that. And I think he kicked himself a bit more because he doesn't make them mistakes. And yeah, it's going to be really tight as well now coming into the next couple of races, see if he can kind of get that buffer back up, like you said, or if it's going to continue to kind of decline and kind of decrease. And it will be kind of interesting to see how it happens, just because I feel like we haven't really thought about someone challenging Palou this closely yet.
But as I said, I don't think this race is really that reflective of overall performance, because Palou's always been good at qualifying and short oval. He's had some good qualifying results there. I don't think we can take this as Palou is suddenly really, really good at short ovals, because they weren't doing the fundamentals. They weren't trying multiple lanes. They weren't overtaking traffic, amongst other things. So we can't, I don't think, fully say, oh, Palou's got ovals correct, because this wasn't a representative oval weekend by really any stretch of the imagination. So obviously it's big, but you can't say it's what it is.
Yeah, well, I was going to get onto this later, but I think it's probably a good time just because of the point you've brought up. That Ed Carpenter made some comments to media, I think it was the Indy Star, motorsport.com, basically that he was speaking about the hybrid, and he wasn't the only driver to mention that the package was a bit heavy. And Ed actually said that essentially we have to get used to this sort of race being the sort of oval race we see because of kind of the added weight that the hybrid system's brought, and he kind of expects similar in the upcoming oval races. You know, he just ranted on about the hybrid and said he essentially feels like the racing's been made worse for a lot more money, which for him, obviously, as a team owner, he knows that quite closely. And it's, as we kind of touched on it is a risk to touch what is already a really strong product. And so far in this race, Mid-Ohio, we've seen difficulties passing. Look at Mid-Ohio and the kind of issues that O'Ward and Palou had when they were stuck behind, was it Kiffin Simpson, Augustine Canapino, the lapped cars. They couldn't pass them. And whether that is a direct correlation, you know, we have to wait for more races to kind of try and see. But I think what Carpenter was saying was that it almost negates the added overtake options that the hybrid system brings. I think Will Power was another in the post-race press conference to talk about the fact that a new car, which he suggested could come in the next couple of years, which I thought was interesting, needs to be lighter, because ultimately, I think Power kind of alluded to differences between earlier in the year when it was kind of the lightest cars have been in a while to now where we've got the hybrid weight and it's kind of scarcely been heavier than it is at the moment. So yeah, like the sample size is small, but I think there are some concerns there. I think Carpenter even said essentially he'd take the hybrid out because he feels a big issue is separate from the system, the fact that essentially not enough tyre testing has been done, that the hybrid's been tested rigorously, but it doesn't necessarily fit the rest of the package. And there's almost kind of some hedging of bets when it comes to the tyres that are being brought. And obviously we found out at the Iowa test a few weeks ago, the compound was too hard, but it was still too kind of robust and durable for this race, which is why we saw no fall off and the racing was kind of as it was. So it does feel like, as much as the repave, there's almost some worries that the downforce package that was brought, coupled with the hybrid system being there, adding that weight and having these more durable tires, essentially causing issues to the racing. So kind of circling back to why I came onto this, you say, Palou, oh, well, it's kind of not representative, but I think there are some fears that this could be what oval races for the rest of the season do end up looking like, which is a big worry, because we love oval racing and we always say, oh, it's so much more than driving in circles. But the way that we are, and whether it is kind of the added weight or the hybrid system causing this, we'll find out in the future races. Look at Gateway immediately after the Olympic break. But I think there's a lot to be proven. And just a few other notes on the hybrid system as well was that we saw the likes of, I think, Christian Lundgaard stalled on track after a spin early in the first race. His hybrid system overheated, so he couldn't get going again. It's understandable. Qualifying mess as well. Yeah, that they had to rerun. I think the hiccups are understandable, but I think there's a lot to overcome, and it goes deeper than just the hybrid system having some hiccups. I think Dixon said it wasn't working properly again in the first race for him, but I think the hybrid system needs maybe refining a little bit more. That'll come, but also kind of the package that comes around it. There's some worries there.
Let's actually get on to Colin Herter, because he was a talk of qualifying, was given the opportunity to rerun after his hybrid had some sort of issue. Got onto the fast lane, opted not to because he was already in pole for race one, didn't want to withdraw his time. And then very Herter, isn't it? Was in a good position and somehow managed to throw it away. He somehow managed to absolutely cook his tyres. Pitted just as Palou spun, which obviously put him a lap down, cycle to the back. Made an absolutely outrageous save later on, absolutely ridiculous. And then race two was fine. There were no issues there. But race one seemed like a big opportunity for Herter, and yeah, wasn't to be.
Yeah, it was the first oval pole, and that's why there was kind of this whole thing. I mean, it was quite impressive that he set that without the use of the hybrid system, which isn't, it's not a major boost, but it gives a little bit of a gain. So yeah, I guess it was impressive that he was on pole despite that issue. Started fourth for the second race, but yeah, races were. I mean, it was unfortunate. Yeah, okay, he cooked his tyres, but that was around the pit cycle anyway. So ultimately, it was unfortunate that the camera essentially cut to behind his pit stop. Palou was spinning, which was just. I do feel for him because he was in a position there to certainly be on the podium. And then the second race was it was a quiet one. I guess it kind of maybe we touch on Pato O'Ward after this. It was kind of similar to O'Ward's second race as well. They both kind of. It was just a case of not being able to make the headway, even if you had a fast race car. But it was, Herter's. Unfortunately, if he got that result in the first race, he'd probably be there with sort of McLaughlin 65 points back in the championship, Dixon 57 points back. But unfortunately, he's now 79 back, and that looks a little bit hard to gain if he's to put any fight up, really.
We'll touch on Pato O'Ward then, as you highlighted. Second in race one, which is I thought was quite good. I mean, as I said, 95% of the passing was on the pit lane. So the fire team did a great job at rotating him a couple of spots up every point. He said earlier he thought his car was better than McLaughlin. So he felt slightly aggrieved that he couldn't win. Then you said race two, I mean, the majority of the field of the same story. You couldn't really overtake. You just had to wait in line. But the thing for him is he's getting points in the championship, and yeah, I mean it's a full podium this year, which is pretty good. And I think he's now third in the standings, which I think where he was last week. He jumped as the second overnight before Palou had his performance, but I think he's just about in touch with the championship fight now, which he's good at ovals, as we know. There's four of them left, so it's one to watch.
And I think one thing to note as well, Dixon's still there too. I think he finished fourth in both races, so I wouldn't count him out either. He's kind of lurking, Scott Dixon.
Not, no.
Oh no, I'm not saying you are, but I'm just saying, like, I think just a general kind of statement. I think we kind of overlook Scott Dixon sometimes, and he's certainly lurking to pounce, and it just will take him to kind of end the season as he did last year, have another one or two of these kind of mega fuel safe performances. 2 wins could really swing him up towards Palou. So yeah, that was a solid weekend for him, even if he did have more kind of hybrid hiccups, as we might put it.
Well, let's look at the championship picture now. We said we'd do this after Iowa because this is where we get a better understanding. Have we got 5, we reckon? We're still in a realistic chance? Palou, Pato O'Ward, Dixon, McLaughlin?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I would say as well, McLaughlin, it's super impressive that he's even in with a remote shot here, because he was the last in the standings after the first 2 races after being disqualified from third in St. Pete and the mechanical at Long Beach. That's impressive stuff, and I think if I'm right in saying that he's been on the podium now in, he must have been 3 successive races. If it wasn't for kind of the way things panned out with Palou jumping him in the pits due to the caution, and he could have, and obviously Power as well jumping up. He could have taken a double win easily this week, and I think he was in a position to do that. He put himself there with qualifying, and look, the pick of the Penske's really, it was still quite incredible that Power somehow managed to. I don't think you'd have probably got a lot of money back if you put a bet on Power winning that second race. Yeah, I think it's got to be those 5. And I think, you know what, I picked McLaughlin ahead of the season, and he's only 13 points behind Pato O'Ward, who he feels in with a pretty viable chance. So, yeah, any of those 5 could easily win it.
I was going to say, I think it's possible, but anyone kind of below that, they would have to have a really good race and everyone else would have to have like a really bad race. I just don't think it's kind of feasible to do.
But it's one race can put you in and put you out. Let's say Palou wins and McLaughlin has some sort of issue. Suddenly he's almost 100 points behind. So
that's what we saw in the first race as well at Io. That was kind of with 2 of your protagonists having issues. All of a sudden it looks completely different, and it's still that tight that can happen at any point, really.
So I mean, Toronto's obviously Palou's quite strong, and where isn't Palou strong in fairness? But I think we're in for quite a good battle almost. I feel out of the top 5, you'd probably say Palou still is the weakest driver on ovals. But on the flip side, he's probably the strongest on the road courses. So I'll probably say out of those 5, Pato O'Ward might be strongest on the ovals, but he's the weakest on the road courses. Whilst Dixon, he's good at everything. McLaughlin and Power all pretty well rounded. So we're in for an exciting end, hopefully. We got more of a championship battle than we did last year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure we all have our favourites. I'm sure we're rooting on for someone to win the IndyCar title this year. And if you want to support your driver even more, you can head to the Formula Model Shop website to get your own merch to support the driver, whether that's Will Power, whether that's Pato O'Ward, whether that's Scott McLaughlin, whoever it is, they'll have it at Formula Model Shop. They are the best place to buy your IndyCar merchandise in Europe and, of course, United Kingdom.
You can use the discount code 5BOMB, or one word, FIVEBOMB, to gain 5% off products on the FMS site. Visit the Instagram highlights on the DIVEBOMB Motorsport Instagram account for a link to an exclusive VIP section on the FMS store, courtesy of DIVEBOMB.
And after you've read all the articles on the DIVEBOMB website, you can head to the pink banner on the home screen, which will take you straight to the Formula Model Shop website.
Stay tuned for exclusive giveaways, events, and other content.
Right, let's get on to poor Jack Harvey, who you mentioned last week was having some sort of back issues, neck issues, and drove through the pain at Mid-Ohio. Basically seems like his situation worsened. Tried practice, he did qualify. He was asked to rerun, and he was asked to rerun again. I think did he rerun the second time? I can't remember.
He reran 3. He did 3 separate runs.
Fine. Tried to get Conor Daly in for the first race just because he was in so much pain, and fair enough. He said, "I'm a fighter. It is my job, and I love it, but I don't want to be posing a risk to myself." And he parked it fairly early on, advised by the IndyCar medical team. I mean, he probably was quite clever just to do the first few laps. So if there was a first corner crash, which there was, he could pick up a few more points there if needed by doing not very much work. Obviously parked it about 30 laps in, understandably, and then at the advice of IndyCar, and then Conor Daly came in for the second race. He had an issue on pit lane, which took him out of contention. So fortunately, it's a bit of a short cameo for Conor Daly, but obviously we wish Jack Harvey the best. He's probably not going to be back next week. It looks like it's going to be Toby Sauer in an IndyCar debut for Hunter McElroy next week. So best of luck to them both. But yeah, a bit of a shame for that Brit Jack Harvey. But he's a fighter, and he did everything he could. But unfortunately, obviously, his personal well-being takes priority.
You could see how much he was struggling as well, and how much pain he was in after his second run, because he was struggling to get out the car. He was stood up like in his seat, and he had one of his team, like, I want to say holding him, just like trying to help him get out. And so they had to do that 3 times. I think probably made it like a lot worse. And I think after the first run as well, he was in an interview and he was like, "I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm in agony. Like, it is awful." And that he was struggling to like string multiple laps together. And I don't think it was like in that moment, I don't think he was 100% sure he was going to be racing later. He still had to speak to people, and I think he didn't kind of want to let people down, but at the same time didn't want to make it worse to the point where it's like irreversible. So that racing now, it might seem better, but then in a couple of races, he might not be able to do it. And then say a crash happens or something happens on the race, and that could be the end of his career. It's kind of the going to the worst end, but it could happen. Stuff happens. It happens really quickly on the track. No one really knows what happened. And like I said, I'm just wishing him the best, because you could tell that he was in a lot of pain, and I don't think it wouldn't be nice for someone to kind of go through that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few points to make on this, I think particularly related to the fact that he was kind of ultimately cornered into racing at least a part of that first race. I mean, to start with, I think they said on the Peacock broadcast on Friday that he was improving a little, but I think there were comments from drivers, especially after the replay, that the track had got so fast that the G loads were pretty significant, coupled with the heat as well. I don't think it was quite as physical as they expected in the end, but clearly Harvey made some sort of regression from Friday into Saturday, as he kind of said he was in absolute agony. And I think his qualifying runs were really good, or considered. I mean, his first run, he still out-qualified teammate Catherine Legg, who I must say had a decent weekend, actually. She raced pretty well in both races, but I think he out-qualified her by 2-3 miles per hour on both runs. But then was made to run again due to the hybrid issue, when he was already kind of struggling to get out the car. And then as he made his second run, improved again, had to get in again, which was just brutal. But again, he improved further, which was so impressive, so brave and so valiant of him. But I think it ultimately reached a stage where, is it really safe? Because what if there was some sort of issue that happened in it, like, if there was some sort of fire and he couldn't extract himself from the car, if he was in a situation like Kirkwood was underneath Ed Carpenter's wheel, that sort of thing. So then obviously you had the bizarre situation where Dale had kind of told Joey Barnes of motorsport.com that Daly was going to race, and then I think the teams seemingly kind of found out that they couldn't run a refresher or just install laps for Daly, essentially because there were concerts going on. And yeah, I mean, clearly Harvey was in so much pain that he wasn't going to race. And that kind of says it all, really, that you've got a bit of a safety issue here. I think it is, as we've said, honourable that he wanted to give it a go. But yeah, I mean, it was just brutal to see him kind of get out the car, and so gingerly so as well. And ultimately, I think, IndyCar they have in the rule book about abandonment of procedures. And I almost feel like this was a sort of time where you'd kind of just give special dispensation for Daly to step in, because it just didn't seem safe to have Harvey in the car in the sort of state he was in. He couldn't really even seem to move his neck. He was a bit robotic when you kind of saw him moving around. So yeah, I mean, I really feel for him. Apparently it came on suddenly during the Mid-Ohio weekend. So yeah, I mean, so determined of him. And I mean, it was good to see Daly back. That's at Harvey's misfortune, at least it was good to see Connor get another shot. He's doing a few things. He's actually racing in IMS in NASCAR Xfinity Series at the weekend, along with a few, I think, Truck Series races as well. It was the fourth time he's driven for Dale Coyne Racing. He flew in on Roger Penske's private jet, apparently, after discussions on Friday night. And I mean, thinking he's been there 4 times. Do you reckon he's ever said goodbye properly to a team or had an actual send off? Because there's always this chance he's just gonna step back in. Maybe ECR. Things don't seem very, very ceremonious there, do they? But yeah, it was a shame that, I think he retired about sort of just beyond the midpoint with some sort of issue. So a lot of work and stress of getting him there for not a lot in the end. But it was just a disaster weekend really for the 18 as a whole.
As I said, second short ever in a row that Daly has replaced Harvey after replaced him at RLL last year. So I mean, we won't go through the entire 2 fields today just because there probably is too much to go through, but we'll pick out some standout performances. I think Rinus VK has won 5th in race 1, 9th in race 2. It's his first top 5 since Iowa 2022, so that's a great performance. I thought Santino Ferrucci was excellent. He was the only one even attempting to make moves, high side, low side. He was the only one actively trying to make overtakes, and he was absolutely fantastic. Finished 6th in race 1 despite a penalty, which was a stop and go for a restart violation and following to fail IndyCar's instructions. Still ended up 6th, which I thought was really impressive, and then P11 in race 2. So Ferrucci was very strong, and pick out one or two others. I think Marcus Armstrong got a top 10 on effectively his first IndyCar race, which I thought was a very decent performance too. So, yeah, Graham Rahal, 8th place race too. Good performances.
Yeah, I think VK is a big one because, I mean, we've spoken on recent episodes. He's been through the ringer with just mechanical problem after mechanical problem. It was his first top 5 finish that first race in a couple of years, and obviously to back that up with another top 10. I think he maybe only finished in the top 10 once or twice prior, maybe St. Pete and the 500, if my memory serves me correctly. So that was solid. I think Ferrucci was probably the most. He was probably my performer of the weekend. I think just for the fact that he was really going bold and trying to make things work. Because the first race he was pegged back by. He was out of line, so got a penalty and then didn't serve it correctly or something. So on top of that drive through, he got a stop-go penalty, fell a lap down, but still made his way through the field with, quite a sublime performance, some real fireworks. And he kind of just repeated the same in the second race as well in terms of getting back through. He started a bit further down in that second race, but he's got, I think, 7 top 10s this season, and crucially for him, he's now top 10 in points as well, which is huge, really. He was the only driver kind of making it not a procession of a race, really. I think Armstrong's a good one to mention. That was impressive for his first oval race. I actually think before his accidents, especially the first race, I thought Stingray Rob was kind of running fairly well at times. Kyle Kirkwood, that was a good drive in the first race. He didn't qualify particularly well for either. He was running, I think he finished 7th and then was running all right in the second race before the accident, but still actually finished 15th because it was on the last lap. So I don't know if he's any longer got the best worst finish, whether anyone's got a better worst finish than 15th, but that was less disastrous than it could have been. I think Graham Rahal's won again for me, really. He qualified pretty well for both. He had an engine penalty in the first race, but started 8th. I think he started 12th and then started 8th for the second, or he would have started 12th for the first. And then just stayed in the top 10. And early in the second race, he said the car is really good, which is kind of a rarity because by his own admission, he likes to speak quite candidly and often is suggesting constructive improvements on the radio. So that was quite cool to see. I actually spoke to Graham Rahal in a pre-event media call last week on kind of the team and his performances so far this year, where he stands or where the team stand on ovals. He was quite confident about Iowa, and also he kind of gave some details on how he expects the rest of the oval races this season to pan out. I'm kind of interested in how you evaluate the year that you have had so far this year, you and the team, because obviously last year, we saw multiple poles, we saw Christian take that win. So how has this year on the whole compared to what you guys did as a team last year?
Well, on my side, I'm extremely disappointed. I won't sugarcoat that. I think you guys all know me well enough to know that I don't do that. I'm extremely disappointed at the way that we've performed. There's been times like Mid-Ohio where we did have some pace, but we didn't improve even in the race. We just never improved through the weekend, and others caught us, and others were just better. By the end of the weekend, we weren't the fastest. We weren't even in the top 5 or top 7 fastest. So those are difficulties that I think are a little bit frustrating. But I will say this. On a whole, I think we've been much more competitive than we were last year, which is going to shock people I say that. But there's a lot of places that we have gone that we have been much, much closer and faster than we were last year. You look at the Indy 500, I understand I still qualified 33rd. I am well aware. But if you look at our gap to Ganassi last year was like 6 miles an hour. And if you look this year, it was like 1.5. That's a big change. That is a big change. And so, I think we've done an okay job in many areas. But I think the future is really bright. When I look at the changes that we've had mid-season here, we've had a couple of people leave that were But I thought positives were good things that they moved on. It has allowed some other young stars to come up and shine, and that maybe were kind of held in the weeds there for a little while. And I think the future of the team is extremely bright. Even if Christian moves on, that's not gonna, I don't think, detract us or take away, from what we've been able to do. I think the opportunities ahead are really good. So while I'm disappointed, I mean, we're 16th in points. If you look at our early season in particular, we just missed so many opportunities. I mean, fueling issues or, really untimely yellows. And we're running well at St. Pete, running really well at Barber. They just absolutely killed our strategies. And that happens sometimes. It's just frustrating when it happens kind of like as consistently. I mean, you look at Laguna Seca as well. I mean, we're probably finished not top 10, but right at it. And after where we started, you would have taken that at Laguna, but instead get caught up in somebody else's mess. And, there's been a lot of that this year, but in my position, unfortunately, I've been through that a lot. And so I'm experienced with it, and you just got to put your head down and keep working, because all you need to know is you can go to Iowa this weekend and win a double. I mean, that's the truth. Things in this series are so competitive nowadays. It is so close at all times, that it's very, very frustrating, but it's also, cool to be a part of an era in motorsport like this that's as close as it is.
And then obviously we've got quite a lot of oval races coming up, and a lot was made of the hard work that went into improving at the 500. And I guess we certainly saw that in the race. But obviously last year, I think it's probably fair to say there were maybe a few issues on shorter ovals too. So can any of that work from the 500 kind of translate, and sort of how confident do you feel going into this kind of swing of shorter ovals now to end the season?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's a product of the oval itself, not necessarily the package, meaning like Iowa has always put on a great race. I get the Penske has dominated, but the mid-pack and everybody else, it was always an exciting race because there's a lot happening. Obviously Penske has a huge leg up when it comes to the dampers and the shocks that they build in the house. Go look at them on the cars. They look like aliens compared to every other damper on the, in IndyCar. They're a totally different thing. So they dominated, but that's gone this year at Iowa. I mean, this is a fresh take on what Iowa is going to be. I think that's great for the fans. I think it's great for the opportunity. Gateway was a better race in recent years, right? I mean, we started to get the second lane in 1 and 2, a little bit of movement there in 3 and 4. How does the hybrid come into play at Gateway? Because obviously Gateway, utilizing it there again, as I talked about earlier, very slow speed, turn 1 and 2. And so you'll have a greater net effect of the hybrid boost than you would, in say Iowa or Nashville, et cetera. And then, I think Milwaukee is a question mark. I'll be frank. I think Milwaukee needs some work from the package that we all tested there at. The tire was quite hard, very hard for the grip level that the track had. And IndyCar is aware, and they're working hard on the aero package and everything else that they can. And then Nashville is kind of an anomaly because Nashville is like a short oval that's not a short oval, right? It's high speed, concrete. And I think much like I said about Iowa, if we run a high line practice in Nashville, because of the texture of the concrete, it applies rubber very, very fast. And so if we run a high line practice, I believe it will come in Nashville. So I think you can have some good shows there to finish the year off. But there certainly is a lot of ovals here in the last little stretch.
And do you guys at RLL feel like you are in a position to maybe be a bit more competitive than you were last year on these ovals?
I think we have work to do still. I think Iowa, we can be very competitive. I feel strongly. But I think Milwaukee, we struggled as a team, point blank. I felt like Nashville, we were okay. We just did a tire test, so I only ran, a few sessions, to be honest. I barely ran, but we were okay.
Right, just trying to go around through some of the incidents. Obviously, race 1, turn 1, Malukas and Lundgaard lost it on the apron. That quite out Canapino and Grosjean, so that's pretty unfortunate. Malukas called it a rookie error, so he was pretty upset himself for that one. And then we had Rahal go off, I believe. Then obviously we had
the Rahal one was quite an interesting one. His wheel cracked basically, and it was holding on by like one spoke apparently, and if not, it would have been like a monster crash. So that was nearly really bad.
Then we had Lundqvist with some sort of mechanical failure exiting turn 2. Herta's non-spin, and then the Fittipaldi, Carpenter, and power crash. And then race 2 is just Canapino, obviously had some sort of issue, and then the last lap accident. So
yeah, and talking of the Herta half spin, Ericsson had essentially the same moment. It just didn't bring out a caution and wasn't caught on kind of the broadcast. But he had a pretty up and down weekend, Marcus Ericsson, I must say. It was basically like a back to the Indy 500 with a very hefty practice crash, like the incident he had on Thursday at the 500. It was big damage. He was the only driver to actually make wall contact, and with that being the only practice session of the weekend, that's quite a big thing. Next time he's in the car, he's basically going straight into qualifying. It was a bit of a sense of deja vu. However, he actually ended up qualifying really well. I think, especially for the first race, just get the results up here. He started 10th and finished 9th, which, considering he basically had no practice running and was going in blind to qualifying with a repaired car, that's a really strong run. In the second race, he was kind of just handicapped by, I think there was a wheel gun failure or something. But I was very impressed with his kind of bounce back from that crash. And I think, talking of stuff crashes that are like the Indy 500, Malukas' in the 66 was eerily similar to the one that Tom Blomqvist had that was his final act in IndyCar. And it was, just super unfortunate that both of the Hunkas cars were caught up, because that was a major repair job for them. But Grosjean actually finished in the top 10 in the second race, so he's another one that was a bit of a standout performer.
Unsung hero of the weekend. I feel like we might get a few VKs this week.
God, I haven't even thought about that, actually.
While you guys think, I'll just say someone who's not an unsung hero that we haven't mentioned is Ed Carpenter. That he had a rough weekend, Ed Carpenter. I think that just bears mentioning. He was pretty slow in practice, struggled in qualifying, wasn't running particularly well, I don't think, in either race. Obviously, coming into that car as the overall specialist with Rasmussen stepping out after his impressive Indy 500 performance. Then Carpenter was caught in crashes that weren't his fault at the end of both races, so he wasn't an unsung hero. Have I bought you some time to? I'm
already going for VK. I'm already going for VK.
I'll switch it up a bit. I'll go for Nolan Siegel, just because I think mostly the first race in the little collision, he managed to avoid both little accidents that happened around him. Like, I was going to say rarely, but I meant just a little bit.
There were too many fireworks from Ferrucci to be unsung, so I think VK is probably mine as well, but for the sake of being different, I'll go for Graham Rahal. I think Marcus Armstrong for the first race as well, but he dropped off a bit in the second.
Funny moment, I think, has to be McLaughlin on the broadcast, no? Not knowing if he was live, but trying to work
Do you know what that was a reference to?
No idea.
I didn't know.
So Josh Allen, who is the Buffalo Bills quarterback, basically did the same thing on I think just some sort of joke on I think he was like in an invitational golf event or something. Basically just said, "Oh, we live," and stared into the camera. So McLaughlin knew they were live. He was just doing it as a reference to that. So yeah, I think that's mine. I was just very amused by how Alex Palou is so happy about everything. Yet he was like, after finishing second, which was probably his best, one of his best short oval performance. He was just very, very sort of disappointed with the way things have panned out in the press conference.
It wasn't quite Newgarden last year. He won the race and then just started screaming at everybody to drop the kid his way.
It's just, I've never seen anything that was like, it was like Will Power-esque from Palou. He was kind of just like, it's boring. Everyone was bored. I've never been so bored. That was quite amusing. Yeah, I think it's got to go to McLaughlin, actually. That was pretty good.
Right, Pass and Cricket Tournament. I've got no idea the scores. I'll find out next week when I come back. I will actually calculate them. But
we're never going to know the scores again.
Yeah, we'll work it out.
We've lost it now.
I predicted Power, Newgarden, McLaughlin, Dixon, Award, Herta, so I got 5 and 3. Archie predicted Power, McLaughlin, Newgarden, Herta, Award, Rossi, so you got 4 and 3. And Ellie, you predicted McLaughlin, Award, Power, Dixon, Kirkman, Newgarden, so you got 4 and 2. So I won that week. So very nice. Podium predictor tournament. So I from car writers. Herta, McLaughlin, Palou race 1, McLaughlin, Palou, Dixon race 2. That gets them 6. Last week, by the way, I do apologise. I forgot McLaughlin finished 3rd. The standings are right. I was just so tired. I didn't clock McLaughlin actually finished 3rd. They are right though. Eddie, you predicted Newgarden, O'Ward, Malukas in race 1. O'Ward, McLaughlin, Newgarden race 2. So I got you 6. I did Newgarden, Palou, O'Ward race 1. Newgarden, O'Ward, McLaughlin race 2, which got me 6. Tom Gamewell predicted McLaughlin, O'Ward, and Palou in both races, which I went quite well for him because he got 9. FMS are pretty brave. They predicted McLaughlin, Newgarden, Rahal race 1. Newgarden, McLaughlin, Canapino race 2, which got me 7. And then Josh Mason predicted McLaughlin, Newgarden, Herta for both races, which got me 6. The fans, where are you at? You're not voting at the minute. Come on, fans. Interact with our stories. You're not voting. You're not helping your cause. But for the first time in podium predictor history, we have a perfect score as Archie predicted McLaughlin, O'Ward, and Newgarden race 1 and Newgarden, McLaughlin, O'Ward race 2. But you're the first ever individual to get it spot on. Well done.
Yeah, I was extremely happy when I remember, because I couldn't quite remember which. I knew I'd put that order for one race. I couldn't quite remember which, so I was frantically trying to find my submission. And yep, so it proved. I indeed smashed it, which was, the happiest I was all weekend because the race didn't necessarily provide the entertainment, but that made it all worth it.
Right, it's Toronto next week, so let's predict our top 6 for Toronto. I've gone for, have we all gone for Lundgaard this year?
No, I've not.
No, you haven't. Oh, okay. I went for Lundgaard, Palou, O'Ward, Power, Dixon, Herta.
I'm never going for triple Penske again because it's not worked either of the times I've done it. So I'm going to go for McLaughlin and Power, but not Newgarden. Kirkwood and Herta, and O'Ward and Palou.
I went with McLaughlin, Award, Palou, Rosenquist, Power, and Herta.
Nice, that brings us on nicely to Toronto next week, our last street course of the year. So, Lundgaard obviously won last year. Can he repeat his heroics? Who knows? I mean, Toronto's one of those like random weekend where it keeps it coming in race after race. It's the end of 4 races in 3 weeks and the first before the Olympics. So, there'll be a 4-week break after this. This could be quite significant, boost confidence, boost momentum heading into the Olympics. So, it could be quite a significant one, especially against Championship.
I'm going to call a McLaughlin win, I think. I think he's got so much momentum at the moment. I think McLaughlin will win.
I think I said Herta mid-season. So,
I
can't remember. I don't know whether I said any specifics mid-season, but
we said McLaughlin
I now think McLaughlin will win this one.
Yeah, we said McLaughlin will win over. So our prediction is going well. Anyway, that's all we've got time for this week. A bit of a chaotic one. Next week, I believe I'm actually. No, I'm not at home next week. Ignore me.
I'm going to be in Spain next week. I'm going to be in Mallorca. So
I'm going to be in Australia as well.
So none of us
international podcast.
We're trying to bring growth.
We're going to be in 3 different continents.
Yeah.
None of us are going to be home.
No,
are we going to be 3 continents? Where are you?
I'm in Turkey.
Oh, cool. Right.
So, technically, I think on the European side of Istanbul, we'll say it's Asia anyway.
Just travel to the other side for the podcast.
Yeah, I'll find some, cafe or something to record the podcast in. So. Anyway, that's all we've got time for. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening. I know the race wasn't the best, but hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. We'll also have quite a lot to speak about. Hopefully we'll have even more to speak about. And we'll see you.